So here we're starting book 4. We're on page 124 in the book. Book 4, the King and Queen of Sparta. Who are the King and Queen of Sparta? Menelaus. Remember, the two sons of Atreus, Agamemnon and his brother Menelaus, are both kings. Anyone remember where Agamemnon is king of? Technically, the area that he is king of is a city called Mycenae. Mycenae. And Menelaus is king of Sparta, the Sparta. You might remember from looking at the map that Sparta is in the southern part of Greece. Down in, we look at the first of the 3 maps. We get this map of the northern part of Greece. The second one, this middle part of Greece. And Sparta is here, sort of in the, towards the southern end of that. It's along this river. The southern part of Greece here is a bit better for farming than the other parts of Greece. And so Sparta's economy and political setup was a bit different from many other Greek cities. Obviously, there's the reputation of Spartans as this very military people. That's more from later in Greek history. Here in Homer's universe, it's not too different from most of the other parts of Greece. But since it's a bit more open, they also have more horses. We see Telemachus is going to travel by chariot. Nestor offers to send his son with him to take him by chariot to Sparta. So who's the queen of Sparta? If Menelaus is the king, who is it? Helen, the Helen. The Helen. Yes, the woman over whom this whole war was fought.
She was captured. Damn, how you let your wife be captured? You were really that crazy.
Well, so, yeah. You can see why Menelaus was embarrassed. But he had invited Paris into his home. Paris had come as a guest, a wealthy, noble, important guest, and Menelaus had invited him into his home, fed him a nice dinner, and how does Paris repay him? By making eyes at his wife and then convincing her or forcing her, sort of ambiguous, in the middle of the night to run away with him. We're going to see Helen here for the first time in the Odyssey. She appears in the Iliad also. And Helen's this very interesting figure because there is this serious ambiguity of, did she choose to run away with Paris? Did he make her? And she's not quite sure what it was that happened. So she feels a sense of guilt about the war. She's a Greek. There's one scene in the Iliad where she's up on the walls of Troy pointing out to one of the other Trojans who all the different Greeks are. These are men that she knows who fought and died in the war. So now she's back with Menelaus because the Greeks won the war. He brought her back home to Sparta, and they're living out the rest of their lives in peace. Menelaus apparently spent a lot of time, we saw, wandering around getting rich on his way back from the war. But he's finally home. He's got Helen there with him. And it's a little awkward. We'll see. It's a little awkward. You know, they're living together now. But, yeah, we'll see. We'll see. And for Telemachus also, this encounter with all of these, with both Nestor and Menelaus, but also with Helen, here, these are people he's heard of. He knows about this war that his father went off in, but he's never seen them before. This is, for him, it's like meeting people out of a legend. Helen, sometimes she's referred to as the face that launched 1,000 ships. And the Greek fleet had 1,000 ships, and it was because of her. All right, so book 4, page 124. Telemachus has been journeying by chariot from Pylos, where he landed in his ship, to Sparta. And Sparta is the name of the city. That's it, where Menelaus lives. And the region that it's in, the area that the Spartans control, is called Lacedaemonia. So, or Lacedaemon. And the Spartans are therefore sometimes called Lacedaemonians. In fact, on their shields in battle, the Greeks used big round shields. The Spartans would paint a big Greek letter L. It looks like an upside down V. That's what they would paint on there for Lacedaemonia. Sparta is the name of the city, and then the region around it with the villages and the farms and stuff is Lacedaemonia. All right. At last, they gained the ravines of Lacedaemon ringed by hills and drove up to the halls of Menelaus in his glory. They found the king inside his palace, celebrating with throngs of kinsmen a double wedding feast for his son and lovely daughter. The princess he was sending on to the son of great Achilles, breaker of armies. Years ago, Menelaus vowed. He nodded assent at Troy and pledged her hand, and now the gods were sealing firm the marriage. So he was sending her on her way with team and chariot, north to the Myrmidons' famous city governed by her groom. From Sparta, he brought Electra's daughter as the bride for his own full-grown son, the hardy Megapenthes, born to him by a slave. To Helen, the gods had granted no more offspring once she had borne her first child, the breathtaking Hermione, a luminous beauty, gold as Aphrodite. So now, they feasted within the grand high-roofed palace, all the kin and clansmen of Menelaus in his glory, reveling warmly here, as in their midst an inspired bard sang out and struck his lyre. And through them a pair of tumblers dashed and sprang, whirling and leaping handsprings, leading on the dance. The travelers, Nestor's shining son and Prince Telemachus, had brought themselves and their horses to a standstill just outside the court, when good Lord Idoneus, passing through the gates now, saw them there. And the ready aid and arms of Menelaus took the message through his sovereign's halls, and stepping close to his master, broke the news. Strangers have just arrived, your majesty, Menelaus. 2 men, but they look like kin of mighty Zeus himself. Tell me, should we unhitch their team for them, or send them to someone free to host them well? The red-haired king took great offense at that. Never a fool before, Idoneus, son of Boethus. Now I see you're babbling like a child. Just think of all the hospitality we enjoyed at the hands of other men before we made it home. And God save us from such hard treks in years to come. Quick, unhitch their team and bring them in, strangers, guests, to share our flowing feast. Back through the halls he hurried, calling out to other brisk attendants to follow quickly. They loosed the sweating team from under the yoke, tethered them fast by reins inside the horse stalls, tossing feet with their hooves, white barley mixed with wheat, and canted the chariot up against the polished walls, shimmering in the sun, then ushered in their guests into that magnificent place. 126. Both struck by the sight, they marveled up and down the house of the warlord, dear to Zeus. A radiance strong as the moon or rising sun came flooding through the high-roofed halls of illustrious Menelaus. Once they had feasted their eyes with gazing at it all, into the burnished tubs they climbed and bathed. When women had washed them, rubbed them down with oil, and drawn warm fleece and shirts around their shoulders, they took up seats of honor next to Atrides Menelaus. A maid brought water soon in a graceful golden pitcher, and over a silver basin tipped it out so they might rinse their hands, then pulled a gleaming table to their side. A staid housekeeper brought on bread to serve them, appetizers aplenty too, lavish with her bounty. As a carver lifted platters of meat toward them, meats of every sort, and set before them golden cups, the red-haired King Menelaus greeted both guests warmly. Help yourselves to food and welcome. Once you've dined, we'll ask who you are, but your parents' blood is hardly lost in you. You must be born of kings, bred by the gods to wield the royal scepter. No mean men could sire sons like you. With those words, he passed them a fat, rich loin with his own hands, the choicest part that he'd been served himself. So they arrive at Sparta, and again, just like we saw with when they arrive in Pylos to Nestor, there's something going on. What's going on in Sparta when Telemachus arrives?
A double wedding.
It's a double wedding. And who is getting married?
His son, Menelaus' son, and another stuff.
Right, his son is getting married to, did we get the woman's name? We don't. Her father's name is Elector. And then his daughter is getting married to whom? So Megapenthes is the name of his son. And notice he's a bastard son. He's the son of Menelaus and a slave woman. His daughter
The son of Achilles.
is getting married to Achilles' son. What's his daughter's name? What's his daughter's name? Hermione, yes. And Hermione is the daughter of Menelaus and Helen. She's Helen's only child. Just put that away. Put it in your pocket. Thank you. Helen's only child, and Homer says here that this is almost like a punishment from the gods. That even though she has this wonderful beauty, she's not able to fulfill her status here as mother. She doesn't even give birth to a son. Yes. All right. There are some things we could say about this. Weddings are often a sort of coming of age thing. Coming of age is the theme here. Telemachus turning from boy to man. Also, that Hermione is marrying Achilles' son. Maybe might make us think of Iphigenia, right? Agamemnon's daughter, who was fooled into thinking she was going to marry Achilles. Okay, so there's this wedding going on, and Telemachus shows up along with Pisistratus, that's Nestor's son, who came with him. And what does Menelaus do when they arrive? What does he do? He welcomes them. How? How does he welcome them? He just says, "Hi, welcome to my house." What does he do? Pages 125 and 126. He invites them to the party. He has them come sit down with him at the table. He has his servants bathe them. They take care of their horses. They sit down with him at this feast. There's meat, there's bread, sure there's wine. And he says, "Go ahead and eat. We can talk later, but you must be starving. Eat first, then we'll talk." All right, picking up in line, 75 or so. They reached for the good things that lay outspread. And when they'd put aside desire for food and drink, Telemachus, leaning his head close to Nestor's son, spoke low to the prince so no one else could hear. "Look, Pisistratus, joy of my heart, my friend, the sheen of bronze, the blaze of gold and amber, silver, ivory too, through all this echoing mansion. Surely Zeus's court on Olympus must be just like this, the boundless glory of all this wealth inside. My eyes dazzle. I am struck with wonder." But the red-haired warlord overheard his guest and cut in quickly with winged words for both. "No man alive could rival Zeus, dear boys, with his everlasting palace and possessions. But among men, I must say, few if any could rival me in riches. Believe me, much I suffered. Many a mile I roved to haul such treasures home in my ships. 8 years out, wandering off as far as Cyprus, Phoenicia, even Egypt. I reached the Ethiopians, Sidonians, Erembians, Libya too, where lambs no sooner spring from the womb than they grow horns. 3 times in the circling year the ewes give birth, so no one, neither king nor shepherd, could want for cheese or mutton, or sweet milk either. Udders swell for the sucklings round the year. But while I roamed those lands, amassing a fortune, a stranger killed my brother, blind to the danger, duped blind, thanks to the cunning of his cursed, murderous queen. So I rule all this wealth with no great joy. You must have heard my story from your fathers, whoever they are. What hardships I endured, how I lost this handsome palace built for the ages, filled to its depths with hordes of gorgeous things? Well, would to God I'd stayed right here in my own house with a third of all that wealth, and they were still alive. All who died on the wide plain of Troy those years ago, far from the stallion land of Argos. Tears, now brushing tears away. The grief that numbs the spirit gluts us quickly. For none of all these comrades, pained as I am, do I grieve as much as for one, that man who makes sleep hateful, even food, as I pore over his memory. No one, no Achaean labored hard as Odysseus labored, or achieved so much. And how did his struggles end? In suffering for that man. For me, in relentless, heartbreaking grief for him, lost and gone so long now. Dead or alive, who knows? How they must mourn him too, Laertes the old man, and self-possessed Penelope, Telemachus as well, the boy he left a babe in arms at home. Such memories stirred in the young prince a deep desire to grieve for Odysseus. Tears streamed down his cheeks and wet the ground when he heard his father's name, both hands clutching his purple robe before his eyes. Menelaus recognized him at once, but pondered whether to let him state his father's name or probe him first and prompt him step by step. While he debated all this now within himself, Helen emerged from her scented, lofty chamber, striking as Artemis with her golden shafts, and a train of women followed. Adreste drew up her carved reclining chair. Alcippe brought a carpet of soft-piled fleece. Philo carried her silver basket given by Alcandre, King Polybus' wife, who made his home in Egyptian Thebes where the houses overflow with the greatest troves of treasure. The king gave Menelaus a pair of bathing tubs in silver, 2 tripods, 10 bars of gold, and apart from these, his wife presented Helen her own precious gifts: a golden spindle, a basket that ran on casters, solid silver polished off with rims of gold. Now Philo, her servant, rolled it in beside her, heaped to the brim with yarn prepared for weaving. The spindle, swathed in violet wool, lay tipped across it. Helen leaned back in her chair, a stool beneath her feet, and pressed her husband at once for each detail. Do we know, my lord Menelaus, who our visitors claim to be, our welcome new arrivals? Right or wrong, what can I say? My heart tells me to come right out and say, I've never seen such a likeness, neither in man nor woman. I'm amazed at the sight. To the life, he's like the son of great Odysseus. Surely he's Telemachus, the boy that hero left a babe in arms at home, when all you Achaeans fought at Troy, launching your headlong battles just for my sake. Shameless whore that I was. My dear, the red-haired king assured her. Now that you mention it, I see the likeness too. Odysseus' feet were like the boy's, his hands as well, his glancing eyes, his head, and the fine shock of hair. Yes, and just now as I was talking about Odysseus, remembering how he struggled, suffered all for me, a flood of tears came streaming down his face, and he clutched his purple robe before his eyes. Right you are, Pisistratus stepped in quickly. Son of Atreus, King Menelaus, captain of armies, here is the son of that great hero, as you say. But the man is modest. He would be ashamed to make a show of himself his first time here and interrupt you. We delight in your voice as if some god were speaking. The noble horseman Nestor sent me along to be his escort. Telemachus yearned to see you so you could give him some advice or urge some action. When a father's gone, his son takes much abuse in a house where no one comes to his defense. So with Telemachus now. His father's gone. No men at home will shield him from the worst. Wonderful, the red-haired king cried out. The son of my dearest friend, here in my own house. That man who performed 100 feats of arms for me. And I swore that when he came, I'd give him a hero's welcome, him above all my comrades. If only Olympian Zeus, far-seeing Zeus, had granted us both safe passage home across the sea in our swift, trim ships. Why, I'd have settled a city in Argos for him, built him a palace, shipped him over from Ithaca, 130. Him and all his wealth, his son, his people too. Emptied one of the cities nestling round about us, one I rule myself. Both fellow countrymen then, how often we'd have mingled side by side. Nothing could have parted us, bound by love for each other, mutual delight, till death's dark cloud came shrouding round us both. But God himself, jealous of all this no doubt, robbed that unlucky man, him and him alone, of the day of his return. So Menelaus mused, and stirred in them all a deep desire to grieve. Helen of Argos, daughter of Zeus, dissolved in tears. Telemachus wept too, and so did Atreus' son Menelaus. Nor could Nestor's son Pisistratus stay dry-eyed, remembering now his gallant brother Antilochus, cut down by Memnon, splendid son of the morning. Thinking of him, the young prince broke out, "Old Nestor always spoke of you, son of Atreus, as the wisest man of all the men he knew, whenever we talked about you here at home," questioning back and forth. "So now, please, if it isn't out of place, indulge me, won't you? Myself, I take no joy in weeping over supper. Morning will soon bring time enough for that. Not that I'd grudge a tear for any man gone down to meet his fate. What other tribute can we pay to wretched men than to cut a lot, let tears roll down our cheeks? And I have a brother of my own among the dead, and hardly the poorest soldier in our ranks. You probably knew him. I never met him, never saw him myself, but they say he outdid our best, Antilochus, lightning on his feet, and every inch a fighter." "Well said, my friend," the red-haired king replied. "Not even an older man could speak and do as well. Your father's son you are, your words have all his wisdom. It's easy to spot the breed of a man whom Zeus has marked for joy in birth and marriage both. Take great King Nestor now. Zeus has blessed him all his livelong days, growing rich and sleek in his old age at home. His sons expert with spears and full of sense. Well, so much for the tears that caught us just now. Let's think again of supper. Come, rinse our hands. Tomorrow at dawn we'll offer me and Telemachus time to talk and trade our thoughts in full." Asphalion quickly rinsed their hands with water, another of King Menelaus' ready aids in arms. Again they reached for the good things set before them. Let's talk a little bit about this conversation over dinner that Menelaus and the rest of them have. So who's involved in this conversation, first of all, over dinner? Menelaus. Who else? Helen shows up as they start eating. Who else? Telemachus and Pisistratus. Pisistratus is one of Nestor's sons, and Nestor has sent him to escort Telemachus to Sparta. Apparently, Pisistratus has made this journey before by chariot from Pylos to Sparta. Telemachus has never been to this part of Greece. He's probably never left Ithaca, the island itself, not a very large island at that. He has no idea how to get to Sparta from there. So Pisistratus escorts him. And so they're Menelaus' guests, and Helen shows up. Notice the emphasis here on the hospitality. They show up. Menelaus takes one look at them and says, "You guys are clearly nobility. Come sit at my table, at my daughter and son's wedding feast, and talk with me." What comes up in this conversation then? What's the topic of conversation? It starts because Telemachus, as he's eating, is struck by the magnificence and beauty of Menelaus' house. Compares it to the home of the gods. It's so beautiful. Menelaus overhears him telling this to Pisistratus. What does Menelaus say? And this is what turns this conversation in the direction that it goes. This is on page 127. So at the bottom of 126, Telemachus mentions that how beautiful the house is. Menelaus looks like a god. But where does Menelaus take the conversation? What direction does that conversation go? I'm sorry? He overhears them and what? And jumps into the conversation. What does he say?
That he cannot overcome Zeus.
Right. Nobody's house is as nice as Zeus's. Don't compare me to the gods. I can't even compete. Yeah, that's a good thing to say. The Greek gods tend to get kind of irritated if you say that you're better than them, and they usually take it out on you. But then what does he say about all of the wealth and riches that he has? This is on page.
There are a few that which is same.
Yeah, he says it's true. As far as I know, basically nobody's as rich as me. I'm not as rich as the gods, but yeah, my life's pretty great in that sense. But what? What's the catch? Yes, Menelaus is extremely wealthy. This war was really beneficial for him from a financial perspective. But what's the but? He suffered. He lost friends, comrades, and his brother. Menelaus shows up in Mycenae, his brother's home, on the day that Aegisthus and Clytemnestra are being buried. His brother's already been dead for years when he shows up. And what does he say? He says at the bottom of 127, or sort of, about 2/3 of the way down, line 108. Well, would to God I'd stayed right here in my own house with 1/3 of all that wealth, and they were still alive, all who died on the wide plain of Troy those years ago, far from the stallion land of Argos. What does he wish? Not so much for them to come back. What does he wish about the past? I would to God. I wish to God.
Like to have a perfect wealth and to have them.
Right. I wish I had stayed home. I wish I hadn't gone to that war. Even though I'm wealthy now. The loss of my friends, my brother, it wasn't worth it. Now notice Helen is not there yet when he says this. Maybe he wouldn't have said it if she had been there at the time. But who? Why do you say? Well, because he fought the war for Helen. If he had never left home, Helen would still be in Troy with Paris. He's not going to say that in front of her, though. I mean, clearly he thinks that. He's got the most beautiful woman in the world as his wife. He's as wealthy as anyone he knows, so much so that Telemachus shows him a house and says, this must be where a god lives. And he says it wasn't worth it. And which Greek in particular is he broken up about? Yes, of course, his brother, his friends were dead. But there's one in particular that really just continues to gnaw away at him. Odysseus. Nobody knows what happens to Odysseus. And he refers to Odysseus as my dearest friend. Page 129. He says Odysseus was his dearest friend. He didn't die honorably in battle. We don't even know if he was lost at sea. Nobody knows. He just disappeared. Maybe he's still wandering. Maybe he's dead. That's what really eats away at him. And of course, so that's going to continue the conversation in the direction it's already turned, this unhappy direction. Why? Who is he talking to? Without realizing it. Odysseus' son. Probably the only person who, well, I don't know, maybe Penelope, but someone who's even more broken up about Odysseus' absence than he himself is. And he doesn't recognize Telemachus until Telemachus literally bursts into tears in front of him. Okay. Because he says, finishing on the top of 128, how much he worries about Odysseus and how much his heart breaks for Odysseus' family, not knowing what happened to him. Telemachus then burst into tears. Tears streamed down his cheeks and wet the ground when he heard his father's name, both hands clutching his purple robe before his eyes. Menelaus recognized him at once. Greek men in Homer's works are not afraid to cry, but they are somewhat discreet about it. Telemachus covers his face with his robe when he cries. But he does cry, even though it's in public here. He covers himself, but he does cry. Okay. Yes, so now Telemachus is upset too. Then Helen shows up. And she's got all these beautiful things. She's got all these riches. She's got this beautiful chair that she sits in. She has all these beautiful women who are her servants. There's this really clever bit in line, 136. Homer compares her to Artemis, the goddess Artemis, which I think is really funny, or ironic, really. Artemis is one of the Greek goddesses.
He told to Paris to go to Sparta because there was Ellen, the most beautiful.
So not Aphrodite. Aphrodite was the one who got Helen for Paris. Artemis is quite different. Aphrodite is associated with romantic love and sex. Artemis, however, she's the twin sister of Apollo. Apollo is associated with archery, the sun, wisdom, sudden death. Artemis is associated with hunting. The kicker here is that she is one of the virgin goddesses, which Helen most definitely is not. And yet she has this pure beauty. Helen has this pure beauty where Homer compares her to Artemis, not to Aphrodite, who has this sort of sensual, seductive beauty. But Artemis has this pure beauty. This is a good example of irony. Irony is very common in Greek literature, in epic, in tragedy especially, in comedy also. What do we mean when we say irony? There are a couple of different senses to it. This will be the last thing. Irony. What is irony?
Like, well, I don't know.
Can you give me an example of something ironic?
Isn't it like when you guess something's about to happen?
Say it again.
Is it like when you guess that something's about to happen?
No, it's actually the opposite. Irony is when things are contrary to our expectations. So, for example, it would be pretty ironic if, as your English teacher, I had a very poor grasp of the English language. And that'd be ironic. You expect somebody who's an English teacher to know what they're talking about. If I made a lot of grammar and punctuation mistakes in the handouts that I made, that'd be kind of ironic. It might be a funny kind of irony, but it might not. It might just be kind of sad or tragic. And so here, this irony here, a couple different ways we could take it. It could be a funny irony. Here in this context, it's probably more tragic. But irony is a good example of tragic irony is when Agamemnon tells his wife, send Iphigenia here so she can be married to Achilles. That should be a really happy occasion. Iphigenia is glad to go. She's going to be a bride to a wonderful, rich, powerful husband. And yet, we know that she's going there to be killed. It's a tragic sort of irony. So be on the lookout for this in literature in general, but also in Greek stuff in particular. All right, book 4 questions are posted on Jupiter Grades, and have a good weekend. Yes?